Hi, everyone. This is Tech and Ed Tech. In this podcast, we discuss technology that powers education and improves learning for all. Welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Dan Gizzi from Magic Ed Tech, and our guest for today's podcast is Louisa Rosenheck, Director of Pedagogy at Kahoot. Louisa, thanks for joining me today and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Would love to hear just a little bit about your background, what brought you to Kahoot, and a little bit more about the company, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So my background is in ed tech design and learning design, and especially how to use games and playful learning to create learning experiences that really go beyond conventional pedagogies and create ways to learn, ways to transform learning that are more student-centered, creative, playful, that can empower students and build more future-ready skills, 21st century skills, those kinds of things. So before coming to Kahoot, I worked at MIT for many years doing design, development, and research of learning games, simulations, other kinds of playful technologies. So really thinking about how do we not just move learning online, but how do we transform learning and use technology that can give students opportunities to create their own experiences and explore their own interests and connect with each other in meaningful ways by leveraging technology. So I worked on a lot of exciting projects for those years at MIT, and then a little over a year ago, I transitioned to industry, coming to Kahoot. Kahoot is a learning platform. It's used in many segments at work, higher ed, K-12, and even for social users in at-home settings. And it is especially well known, I would say, in K-12 settings. Teachers and students are very enthusiastic about Kahoot. It is a platform where anyone can create and host sort of online quiz formats, but it's much more than that. You can teach with slides. There are open-ended questions. So it's also kind of an interactive presentation tool. And what is really, I think, the magic of Kahoot, if you are not familiar with it, is the social aspect, social learning. It brings people together. It makes them feel like they're a part of something bigger, and they can, everyone sort of has a say. Everyone can answer their own questions, and their input shows up on the big screen. But they are also a part of a whole class experience. So, in bringing my past experience to Kahoot, my aim is to help the teams kind of expand how they think about playful learning, game-based learning. How can we make it more open-ended, more creative, and also more inclusive, so that students have more different ways to learn depending on how they learn best and their comfort levels.
Thank you for that. That's great. Digging into my past here, I love seeing the word pedagogy, having been a dinosaur in the education space, and that was a word we used very often, almost every day, in conversations from a sales perspective, selling English and the soft sciences. So I love that you've got that there. And then I can actually say I have used Kahoot during presentations in my training days as well to bring the engagement to the crowd, to make it more of a
Awesome.
less
Yeah,
of
that's great.
the sage on the stage approach. So I'm familiar with your tools. I'm glad that you were able to give that intro to the audience as well. They're not dinosaurs like myself that have heard the word pedagogy before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. The word, as you say, in teaching, everyone thinks about pedagogy. In other realms, they may not know the word pedagogy, but they do think about it, right? Anyone who's designing an experience that has anything to do with learning, really, that's what they're thinking about. Pedagogy is not just what we teach, but how we teach it, what kind of experience. So it is experience design, it's UX, it's learning design. It really is related to all these things.
No, that's great. Just to kind of transition us a little bit, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the game-based learning that you're doing there at Kahoot. It's been another topic that's been around in ed tech for a while now. I'd love to hear some of the innovative things that you and your team are doing around game-based learning and potentially around how you conform, say, to accessibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are so many different kinds of game-based learning at this point, which is very exciting. Having worked with learning games for years, I love that schools, teachers, parents are really embracing them much more and adopting all kinds of different learning games. One distinction I like to make in learning games is there are games that are designed and developed specifically for learning. And of course, there's many different kinds within that. And then there are also teachers that teach with commercial games, entertainment games, but that use those as an experience and then do all kinds of learning activities, whether it's in the game or around the game. So there's so many different ways to incorporate games into teaching and learning. At Kahoot, one of the things that I have been kind of helping push on and think more about is when it comes to the style of game that we offer on the platform, this sort of quiz game, sort of game show style, where in most cases the teacher is hosting the game and all the students are participating. How do we make sure that it's an inclusive learning experience? So for a lot of people, they already think of Kahoot as very inclusive, which is wonderful. It does kind of give everybody a voice and include everyone in the classroom, but it gives everyone an opportunity to be included, but that doesn't go quite far enough. It doesn't mean that that all students really feel like Kahoot is made for them, or that any specific game that's created, Kahoot that's created, really works for them. And there are many reasons for that. A lot of the way people use Kahoot is based on speed and accuracy, and that's fun for a lot of students, that friendly competition, but not all students. Some students, it's a little bit too much stimulation. There's too much going on. It moves too fast. Some students just would shine if there were more different ways to express themselves, more different ways to answer questions. When we think about inclusion, in the work I'm doing right now at Kahoot, we have somewhat of a focus on neurodivergent learners. So this could be students with autism or ADHD, but really any number of different ways of thinking and ways that their minds work. So what we have one project that we're working on right now, which is really thinking about what are some small changes we can make to the Kahoot experience that would give more different students more ways to engage with it in ways that suit them. So kind of more flexibility, more customizability. And this project, I can talk more about it later, but this project is funded by the Lego Foundation. We are part of an accelerator called the Play for All Accelerator, which is really exciting because it means that there's a whole cohort of companies that are thinking about how to make their experiences more inclusive in multiple ways on multiple levels.
That's great to hear. I think, especially from an inclusive and engagement, when a lot of the gaming was being talked about in education, I come from a higher ed background originally. It was finding its way into the curriculum. It was finding its way into, more of just that leaderboard type of approach. And, it tended to have that opportunity before we were talking about inclusiveness of exclusivity, keeping people away from wanting to be involved in that if they were not, accelerating in the class, for example, or if they found themselves lower end on the leaderboard. It was more of a deterrent than a help at the time. So it's great to hear, how that's being thought about and more importantly implemented, is particularly on the K-12 side, where there can be that apprehension, even just the technology in the classroom.
Yeah, right. And I think it's great that you brought up leaderboards because that is one of the sort of most common elements of gamification, and it doesn't always support the best kind of learning. So exactly one of the things we're trying to think about in this project is how can we create some kind of alternative to a traditional leaderboard that recognizes more different ways of being successful, recognizes students' varied strengths, right? Not everybody answers fast. Not everybody knows all the answers to factual questions. Some students have more creative ideas. Some students maybe express themselves better through drawing. So how can we both provide those opportunities in a game for students to express themselves and share ideas, and how kind of leverage the classroom community through the technology to also celebrate those strengths?
So let's look into the crystal ball for a second. Let's say 3 years from now, we've got one-to-one in the classroom, and we're at a point where hybrid is actually working well in K-12 beyond just thinking about how we have to adapt, say, for a pandemic.
Mm.
What would you think? Obviously being on the forefront of this, what's the future for gaming and learning?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of things. I think one thing I'd love to see more of in learning games and in educators adopting games for learning at all age levels and grade levels is more student voice. So this could look like students choosing what games they want to learn with. If they're really interested in, for example, ecosystems, there are some amazing ecosystem simulation games they could play. If they're really excited about history, there are some wonderful historical kind of storytelling games, narrative games that they can play. And then one thing I think that's really important to keep in mind with so many games out there nowadays that are great for learning is students can choose what they play, how they learn, just the way they might choose a book or another kind of resource. And then I think what's really important in teaching is the reflection on that learning. So, what did you learn? What were you surprised by? How can you demonstrate your learning? Is it designing, a mod for the game or a new level for the game? Is it writing a new narrative in the style of this game? Is it, leading an exercise for your peers that to teach them what you can learn through this game? So a lot of giving students more voice and choice in game-based learning can also come from the learning activities and reflection that happens outside of the game. So it doesn't have to be just you play a game, you practiced a skill, and you're done, right? It can be using the game as a jumping off point, as an experience for students to explore their own interests and demonstrate learning in ways that are important to them. And another area that is definitely coming up more and more, and I would love to see in the future, is students creating their own games. There are so many tools for this now. There's more and more coming out all the time. And it really fits right into the kind of metaverse idea and the creator economy and all of these things where, people are more and more empowered to create content. And there's no reason why that can't start young and be done in school as well. And students are already playing games. They love games. So for that reason, I think games is a great forum for all of this to happen.
I love that creator economy line. I think, they all at this age and all think they're going to be YouTube stars and not have to worry about anything in the future. I've got an almost 10-year-old who's already told me he's going to be a YouTube star. So I'm hoping it works out for him. So
that's right.
His college fund can go to other things.
Yeah, right. Even if they, don't end up with a YouTuber career, but those skills, those kind of creative skills and experimenting with different modes of expression, communication, that'll serve them in so many different ways. And a lot of times conventional schooling doesn't address those skills. So all of this, stuff around creativity and content creation and learning through games, it can really support a lot of these future ready skills.
From an educator and again, putting the parent hat back on again, how would you say it's been accepted, at least, say in the classroom and beyond the classroom for the game-based learning, just as things have changed over the last, say, 3 years?
I think over even longer than that, over the last decade, I think things have changed a lot. I remember when I started working on learning games, we had to be very careful how we described them to teachers because some teachers were totally on board, but a lot of teachers and especially administrators too, and parents as well, would think, oh no, games are not meant for the classroom. That just shouldn't be here. So we would call them, interactive simulations and things like that. And I just love how games have become much more mainstream. People really understand their value a lot more. Teachers are seeing the benefits of teaching with games for engagement and students being excited about it, and for the kind of deeper learning that can happen, exploration, problem solving, all these things that are sort of natural to games. And then I would say in the past few years, with the pandemic, I think it has been sort of a mix of both more trepidation, more worry, especially in the lockdown months where students couldn't do a lot of things. So they may have spent a long time in games like Fortnite, Minecraft, and a lot of parents have concerns about that. But I think at the same time, a lot of parents are also realizing, oh, there is value to this. It's a social experience. They're not just zoning out in front of a game. They are actually connecting with friends in ways that right now they can't do otherwise. And in a lot of these games, they are creating and building and collaborating. So I think during the pandemic years, there has definitely been both a little bit more worry and also more recognition of the value.
I think that's great to think that just that connection can happen across the world in that situation where they don't even feel like they're learning, but they are, and it's getting snuck in there from the
Right.
gaming approach. Before we transition here, the one last thing I saw was, from beyond just thinking K-12 for a second, obviously thinking around, say, workforce skills and the continuing education of the learner beyond the classroom experience. Is that something you can talk about as well? Say the training
Mhm.
aspect of that, or is that
Yeah,
something you touched on
absolutely.
with what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. So there are also more and more great technologies being used in higher ed and in corporate learning settings, adult learning. I think they're often more in the vein of simulations rather than games. And again, there's often it's a fine line between the two. They often have
Right.
more in common than they have differences. So regardless, I think, there's a lot of kind of scenario based simulations where that are very hands on. So you're put in a situation and you have a context. Often it's a realistic context based on your workplace or your field. And maybe you have to make decisions or grapple with, difficult situations, or maybe it's very skills based and you have to, go through certain procedures to make sure you know all the protocols and things like that. So there are definitely different kinds of skills that can be built through these types of simulations. And I think that, just like I was saying in K-12, these kinds of experiences are super powerful because they're immersive. You can kind of choose what you want to learn, what you want to practice. It feels hands-on, authentic, and relevant. And I think one of the most important parts of learning through games and interactives is the reflection. What happens afterwards? So for adults, just as much, if not more, I think they really need to not just play the simulation or the game and say, okay, I learned that, I've got my certificate and I'm done. There really has to be more reflection on, okay, what did I learn? What else? What do I still need to practice? How has this gotten me started? And how does this transfer to the real world? And what other resources might I find now that I'm excited about this topic or this area? And who else can I connect with to think deeper about how this applies to our own context? So I think that in corporate training and adult learning, it's especially important to consider that transfer. How do I take this and adapt it and apply it to my own workplace goals and culture?
So, to take your own transfer of knowledge, what advice do you have for ed tech companies and educators that are listening to our show?
Yeah. Couple of things. So one thing I would say is this idea of the learning that has to happen around the game, right? So it's not just here's a game, you play it and you're done. It's also creating, maybe it's bridging curriculum, maybe it's resources for teachers about the pedagogy around the game. So how can we use the game in the best way to build important skills? And the other thing I really want edtech companies to all be thinking about, again, is accessibility and inclusion. And I'll say there are two different types of kind of accessibility and inclusion that I like to distinguish. And one is more in the UI UX, so accessibility of can when people who have different abilities, can they read this? Can they see it? Can they hear it? Can what kind of fine motor skills are needed? Are there different input devices that can work with this? So all of those kind of more tangible, practical aspects. And then in terms of inclusion for the learning design, like what is the experience? Does it give learners different ways to express themselves, different ways to engage and adapt the experience based on their own needs, how they learn, how they think, how they express themselves, all of these kinds of things. So both in terms of kind of UI and experience design, it's really important to think about all learners and make it as flexible as possible.
Louisa, thank you for joining me today for the latest Tech and Ed Tech podcast, and for all of your insight and everything that you're doing for all of the learners as well. We appreciate your insight and look forward to you and our audience joining us in future podcasts.
Sounds great. Thanks so much.